want this to be interactive, and I'm thrilled to see so many people who I didn't even expect to be joining us tonight joining us. So thank you for that. It's wonderful. Let me just check that we're live on Facebook. Let's give it a shot. Oh, it says I'm streaming. Okay. Well, I'm assuming that we are streaming, and I'm hoping that people will be able to see us. And it's great for everyone to be posting as you are. Apologize for the disjointedness. I want to be sure that we're all 100% here before I actually get into some more substantive comments. Here we go. Okay, we're live. So you'll forgive me as I look down. We're going to do some recording now. Record. Great. Welcome. Good evening, everybody. Formally now. For those of you I don't know or I don't know well enough, I'm Jonathan Feldstein. I have the privilege of serving as president of the Genesis 123 Foundation, whose mission is really simple and really special: to build bridges between Jews and Christians with Israel in ways that are new and unique and meaningful. And I'm actually pleased to host this program today, largely thanks to many of you who are here, because beginning last night, there were so many emails and text messages and a couple of phone calls. How are you? How are you doing? And it really became overwhelming in a good way to answer everybody. And I realized from some of the comments that I received that there's a thirst for, there's a concern for what's going on here now. There's a thirst for accurate information, which not everyone here is in the US, but typically overseas international media is not covering, at least in depth, and also with various inaccuracies and bias. So it was important for me to answer as many questions as I could from those who have reached out to me as they have, and all of you. So I'm thrilled that you're here. I do want to encourage people. I'm not seeing it actively live on Facebook, so I hope it will show up, but I do want to encourage you all, as there are questions, please use the chat feature here. I definitely want to be able to engage. This is not only going to be Jonathan giving a briefing, but also interacting and answering and responding to your questions and your concerns. Let me just start a little bit personally about what happened last night when it became evident that we were going down a path here. Thank you, Lee, for letting me know that we're live on Facebook. Though we're in the midst or the continuation of a very troubling week. Last night, I was talking with Frank before, a couple of you, others of you who are not here in Israel and longing to be here in Israel, also haven't been. And as you know, we've been suffering and just now coming out of the pandemic. Last night, my entire family was expected to go to a wedding of our closest friends from the US, the oldest daughter who got married, who had to defer her wedding for months because all of the parents were overseas. So we looked forward to this with great anticipation. My oldest son, who is a paratrooper, got permission to come out of the Army, which under the circumstances, if we can rewind till 28 hours ago, was even still a little bit of an unusual thing. But we were thrilled that he was there. My oldest daughter came to the wedding with our youngest grandson in his stroller, and my son-in-law was going to follow when he put the older grandson to bed, because these are truly our closest friends, and the children of our friends are as close to non-biological children as we have. And my son walked into the house at about 5 p.m. yesterday, my son in the Army, in his, full uniform, and went downstairs, showered, got himself together, and followed us in one of the other cars. And for those of you who have never been to an incredibly lively Jewish wedding, this was it. This was amazing. And during some of the ceremonies leading up to the ceremony, there were rockets that were landing. We were in the Judean mountains, not far from where I live. I live in a town called Efrat. Many of you know where that is. Some of you have been here. We were 15 minutes away, and we did not hear sirens, but we heard the explosion and then saw the plume of smoke in about 3 different places that would have been to the south and west of Jerusalem. And I took pictures. It certainly distracted me, and I knew as soon as that happened, there was no way my son was going to be staying for the wedding. And at the end of the ceremony, he got home at 5:30. At the end of the ceremony, which was about 7, he got home at 5. At the end of the ceremony, at about 7:30, he said, "Abba, I need your car keys. Avital, who's my youngest daughter, has to drive me back to base. I have to be there in 2 hours." And the base is down near Gaza. And then through the grapevine, we learned that since my youngest daughter shouldn't really be driving on the roads alone at night, especially into areas where there are rockets and sirens. So my third daughter went along for the ride. And then we learned that my son-in-law, who's 30, was also called up into reserves because his position in the Army it requires him to be there. There's not been a full call-up, though I heard on the news today that we've called up about 5,000 reservists. That's a lot. It's not a full all-out war with that kind of numbers, but he's been called up. So my daughter went home to put her kids to bed, and we were left with 2 of our 6 kids at the wedding. I'm glad we were at the wedding because it was beautiful, but it was very stressful to be hearing the sirens, the red alerts going off all during the wedding, and yet being as joyful as we were. It's about as polar opposites as we can. I'd like to go through a bit of how we got to where we are. Some of the questions. I'm not talking about 75 years of history, and I'm not talking about 2,000 years of history. Just the last several days to get to where we are, and then have a look at maybe some projections and things. You probably know that we are in the end of the Islamic month Ramadan. It ends in a day or two. I don't know, according to the lunar calendar. And Ramadan, unfortunately, here is a period around which there is increasing tension. That's just the unfortunate reality here. There we go. I see people on Facebook now. I'm glad you're there. So Ramadan, we know that when it happens here, we're in for something that could be a little more challenging and stressful. Compounded with Ramadan, or I should say during Ramadan this year, some of our Arab neighbors, and in this case I'm speaking about both Israeli Arabs and Palestinian Arabs who are not Israeli citizens, started something new. They call it the TikTok Intifada. They use their phones to go and video themselves assaulting Jewish people, not just in Jerusalem, which you know is a mixed city of Arabs and Jews, but different parts of Israel as well. One of the first videos that went viral, so to speak, was in Jaffa. And then I saw videos on the light rail train in Jerusalem and on the streets in Jerusalem. And it became this thing that now became culturally and if you will, politically and socially appropriate among younger Palestinian Arabs to go and assault people who were Jewish. And since we kind of all identify who looks Jewish and who looks Arab, that's pretty easy to do, whether you're an Orthodox Jew like myself with a kippah on your head or not. The TikTok Intifada, bred some riots that took place in different parts, and I'm going to be as absolutely objective as I can to give you the full picture, albeit that I have a very clear bias in this situation, and I don't hide that for a moment. I'm not ashamed of it. There were riots and protests both by Jews and Arabs, respectively. Assaults. There have been most recently, in fact, I was just watching the news today, 2 attempted lynchings of actually 3 of Jewish people in Arab neighborhoods, and some of these are taking place. I want to underscore in what's called the state of Israel proper, not over the Green Line where I live, not even in Jerusalem, in Arab neighborhoods of Jerusalem that some claim are not part of Israel. We're talking about in Jaffa, in Lod, which is near where the airport is. There was another one, I don't remember where that was off the top of my head, but these are increasing. This is also coming on the heels of increased stonings. Some of you may have seen the videos. Also, Ken Barron, I will never forget our conversation about our referring to where I live as the intersection of death nearby. So there was an incident there where with a 60-year-old Palestinian Arab woman who attempted to stab some soldiers. She was shot and died later from her injuries. And there's a whole backstory to that she may have been shamed in her family and had to kind of salvage her honor by what I think it's called death by soldier or something, where it's actually a proactive. But anyway, someone else tried to stab some Israelis with broken bottles. And then there was a shooting in the Shomron, in the Samaria, about a week ago, where 3 people were injured, one badly, shot through the head, and died a few days later of his wounds. The other element to all of this, kind of bringing us to this crescendo that we're at right now, is maybe a week or maximum 2 weeks ago, the Palestinian Authority president, Mahmoud Abbas, decided he would cancel elections that were being scheduled, the first time in 15 years that the Palestinian Authority was going to be holding any kind of presumably democratic election. They were canceling it. Why? Because he blamed Israel for not allowing some 6,000 Palestinian Arabs in Jerusalem to vote in Jerusalem. And it's a conversation we can get into as to why and what that means and and what have you. But the irony, which is not ironic, but it's almost the standard here, is that rather than taking responsibility for the fact that Mahmoud Abbas was very clear he would have lost by a large margin had there been the election. And Mahmoud Abbas, as much as he doesn't like us, he also doesn't like Hamas and some of the other terror groups or breakaways from his faction, Fatah, the PLO, and therefore he didn't want the elections to continue. But rather than taking responsibility for that, rather than coming up with some other excuse, Mahmoud Abbas decided that he would blame Israel. So that blaming Israel became cover for all of those other things that I mentioned and more in the last week or two to progress as they have. Now, during Ramadan and on Fridays, which if you don't know, Friday is the Islamic Sabbath. So Fridays of Ramadan, you know that there's going to be a lot more people praying on the Temple Mount. Muslims, Jews are not allowed up there most of the time during Ramadan. And that's another piece which we'll come to in a minute. And so the last Friday of Ramadan is sort of their, if you forgive the pun, their Hail Mary effort or Hail Mary opportunity to really get in some good violence under the cover of Ramadan. So what was discovered was on Friday, last Friday, a week ago, they started stoning from the top of the Temple Mount down. The Western Wall Plaza was closed. They were throwing rocks at other streets outside the actual path of the Temple Mount. Thank God no one was hurt. And what happened? Israeli police went to the Temple Mount and responded. I'll be honest, and I should have prefaced this, I don't have all of the details on everything that we're going to be talking about tonight. And if you have questions about it, oh, geez, I'm sorry. There's people waiting and I didn't even notice. I apologize, Winston and Jennifer. Apologize for not letting you in earlier. So where I don't know, I'm going to tell you I don't know. But what I do know is they were stockpiling rocks in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, right? That's their third holiest site, and they're using this as a way to attack Jews and Israeli troops or police who are up on the Temple Mount during Ramadan, specifically during Ramadan. So it's the attacking which brought in the police, and the police which then egged on more attacking, and all of that. All of that led to a situation where there were increased riots, and I'll tell you. Sunday, which was Sunday or Monday. One day this week, it's a blur to me right now. Monday, yesterday, was Jerusalem Day, the anniversary which we celebrate according to the Hebrew calendar, the reunification of Jerusalem 54 years ago. And my youngest son, who's 15, he's somewhere here in the house right now, was a little afraid to go to Jerusalem with his class. And he said when he did go, and they were praying at the Western Wall. By the way, the reason I have the picture of the Western Wall behind me is that if I'm boring, at least focus on that and direct your prayers there, because we need these prayers. So he's standing at the actual Western Wall and he's hearing gunshots. He's hearing firing above him. And thank God nothing came down and upset him. But it was evident that this is happening. All of this is taking place on the Temple Mount. Now, I don't know why Israeli troops went into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I have to assume there was a good reason or not. It doesn't really matter, because the Islamic world tends to think of that as sacred as Mecca and Medina. It is there, according to Islam, their third holiest site. And so once Israelis go in there, and made worse by the people who deny the fact that we have a history here, that the Temple Mount is a Temple Mount. It wasn't a platform that was built in the 700s on which to put a mosque, but it was a platform that existed for centuries before that, and on which both temples stood. And when they were knocked down, it was a great piece of real estate on which to build a mosque and replace the center of Judaism. So what's happened there on the Temple Mount, and we have now competing influences. You have Hamas, which we'll come back and talk about it. The very vocal, active terror organization that controls the Gaza Strip, from where we've had now over 1,000 rockets fired at us just in the last 30 hours, if that, maybe less. You have Jordan. This is an interesting, I'm not going to get into it a lot, but there's an interesting dynamic with Jordan, because Jordan technically controls the Temple Mount, and the Islamic Waqf, the authority that controls the Islamic sites up there, is under the authority of the Jordanian Hashemite kingdom. So while Hamas is pretending to be the protector of the holy sites, of the Golden Dome, of the Dome of the Rock, and of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, it's actually directly undermining the authority of King Abdullah of Jordan, who is officially the protector of that. It also brings on, and I lost count as to how many other Arab and Muslim countries have been complaining, including those that have made peace with us. They've been complaining because they don't believe Israel, even in a simple way, that they don't believe Israel has a right to be there at all. Okay, and that's even from some of our, so to speak, peace partners or allies. Now, another element that you may or may not have heard of is there's a real estate dispute in a neighborhood of Eastern Jerusalem. You'll hear of it in the international media known as Sheikh Jarrah, named for some sheikh, I guess, whose name was Jarrah. I don't know who that guy was, but it was actually a Jewish neighborhood called Shmuel Hanavi, Samuel the prophet, which is located adjacent to the tomb of Samuel the prophet, which is why it's called that. That's the name of the neighborhood, and it was a Jewish neighborhood before 1948, before the Jordanians sacked eastern Jerusalem and kicked out the Jews and destroyed all, well, maybe not all, but a whole lot of the Jewish sites. And this particular building in Sheikh Jarrah, in Shmuel Hanavi, is a piece of property that actually is owned by Jews from preceding the founding of the state in 1948. It was reclaimed by the Jewish owners after 1967, the Six-Day War. But the Jordanians had intermittently put in some Arab, I'll call them squatters. They're there now for a number of decades. And there's been a court battle to get them out, to return the property to the Jewish ownership. Now, if any of you were having a legal, territorial, if you will, battle with or conflict over a piece of property, certainly in some jurisdictions, squatters' rights do prevail. I don't know how that law works here, but there was actually a negotiation that was made that the owners, the Jewish owners, said, look, we don't want to kick you out. We just want recognition of our ownership. All you need to do is pay rent. And apparently the Arabs who lived there agreed that they would pay rent until the Palestinian Authority came in and said, no, we're going to assert our rights, that there was never Jewish ownership to this land. So all of this is taking place now, is coming to a crescendo where it's supposed to go before the Israeli High Court to have a judgment, a final judgment on whether or not the Arab residents of that building can stay. And I think probably wisely, and I don't remember what day of the week it was, the court decided to defer that conversation. I don't know if that means the court was going to go in one direction or another, but probably was not useful to add fuel to the fire and potentially risk making things worse, which, by the way, is a shame that anyone has to exist like that anywhere. That if you have a independent judicial system, you may not like the outcome of the courts in any jurisdiction at any one time, but we do have an independent jurisdiction. And to worry that there are going to be riots from one side or the other because of the outcome is a shame and is inappropriate. Jerry McQuay, thank you for joining us. We'll be in touch with you. Thanks. So all of that has led up to Sunday night, Monday, Jerusalem Day, and the celebrations that take place, particularly on Monday, which was coming in the heels of all of this tension and activity taking place on the Temple Mount, to the point that Israeli authorities decided to cancel a part of the parade that typically goes through the old city of Jerusalem. There are a lot of celebrations. I mean, we can talk about that also, but just for those of you who really understand the centrality of Jerusalem, both to Jews and Christians, and the incredible miracle of Jerusalem being reunited 54 years ago this week, it's something that we still truly celebrate. It's something that is incredible, and that happens in so many ways. But anticipating additional violence, parade was canceled. Jews were prohibited from going up to onto the top of the Temple Mount, where, if you recall the famous words of I think it was paratroopers who captured the old city in 1967. The Hebrew is Har Habayit biyadenu. The Temple Mount is in our hands. Now, it's nominally in our hands today, but typically on Jerusalem Day, it is an opportunity for Jews to go back up. And even if we're not allowed to pray there legally, it's certainly an opportunity for us to go and appreciate that it is not the Western Wall that's the most sacred site. It's a fact what's above, and what was there and what we pray will be again soon. All of this now leads up to Hamas asserting itself again as the protector, trying to come in. Hamas is an unabashed terror organization. I've been thrilled to see some of the Israeli media critical of our role in emboldening Hamas by making ceasefires with them, by allowing millions and millions of dollars, maybe billions, I don't know, to pass through from Qatar to Hamas to fund them. Part of it's a little bit of a mafia thing. Hamas says, well, if you don't let the Qataris fund us, then we're going to end up creating terror for you in Israel. It's a really bad scene. It's like Don Corleone on steroids. And Hamas is doing what they do as a terror organization that doesn't recognize the right or legitimacy of Israel to exist. All of that's normal, but it's also overlaid with the fact that the election was canceled, and those who actually cared to have an opportunity to vote this year are annoyed to a degree that they haven't. And Hamas is asserting itself to carry on its influence as a major player, if you will, within the Palestinian Authority. Hamas threatened yesterday. I'm trying to remember the timeline to give it to you accurately. Anything I say that's not inaccurate is not with the intent of giving you misinformation, but it's a lot of material to digest. And if I'm wrong, correct me, or if you find out that I'm wrong, shoot me a note and say, hey, Jonathan, what you said about that wasn't right. I want to be clear. I want to be transparent. So yesterday, Hamas threatened that if Israel didn't step down from the temple, right? Sure, exactly. The timing is right. If Israel didn't leave from the Temple Mount by 6 p.m. yesterday, Monday, then Hamas would start firing rockets. And lo and behold, that's exactly when we were in the pre-wedding stages at our friend's daughter's wedding, and that's when we saw exactly according to the clock. I mean, they were like a Swiss clock as far as they're launching rockets, and dozens of rockets were launched, not just at the Gaza belt area near the border. They came to the south of Jerusalem. Air raid sirens were sounded in Jerusalem. People were in shelters, some by themselves for the first time, not knowing what to do with it, because it's very, very rare that we have rockets in Jerusalem and sirens that take place there. And that's when I saw the landing. I didn't, excuse me, accuracy. I did not see the landing. I heard the explosion and I saw the plume of smoke. That if you want to see the picture that I took, I think I put it on Facebook yesterday. But that's when it started happening. And dozens of rockets were fired toward the Jerusalem area. And then in the later part of the evening, 7:30, 8 o'clock, certainly by 9 o'clock, and going on for the rest of the night, most of the rockets that were being used were short range ones, and they were mostly being fired to areas that were in what's called the Gaza belt, within perhaps 40, 50, 60 kilometers, no, probably 40 or 50 kilometers of Gaza. But understand something, about 1.5 million Israelis live in those areas. Okay, so we're talking about, I'm really bad at math, but 1.5 million is out of over 9 million people. Someone want to tell me what the percentage is, you can, but you get an idea. We're talking about a lot of people who are there. And we're talking about people who, because of the proximity to Gaza, really only have as little as 15, 20 seconds to as much as 40, 45 seconds from once they hear the siren to get in protected space. That's why we had 2 casualties today, because people didn't have time to get to the protected space, and some buildings took direct hits. So there were 2 women who died today, earlier in the day, and as of when I logged in to be with you a little while ago, another casualty. There was another. I made notes of it. Another casualty in the center of Israel, and several more injured, leading to already dozens of injured. Now, just two more kind of broad points about this. It's been fascinating, I have to say. If there are very few things that we have in our lives that we can point to and acknowledge God's hand, it's watching the Iron Dome in action, and we've seen that abundantly. And so let me just say, for those of you who don't know, the Iron Dome is Israel's incredible counter missile system that shoots out of the air short range rockets. And tonight, when there was a barrage of hundreds of rockets shot off in a period of not very long, half an hour maybe, we were watching the news, glued to the news, and watching the Iron Dome go like fireworks, but fireworks go up and explode on their own. These are targeting the incoming rockets. So you see the trail, and then you see the explosion and then the fallout. And it's really miraculous. It's really incredible, and I'm grateful for that. I'm terribly grateful for that. And yes, we can talk about Israel's high tech and startup nation, and how we've created lemonade out of lemons, living in a situation where we're now able to counteract the situation that we're forced to live within. And that is wonderful, and it is truly miraculous, and I'm grateful for it. But the other thing that you don't hear too often, and I would argue that probably most of you have never heard said, as much as the Iron Dome system protects us, knocks out about 8 out of 10 rockets, and can even, when the rocket is launched, it projects the trajectory of the rocket and will only fire a countermeasure at those that are projected to land in in a populated area. So not seeing everyone on board. I know Ken Barron's here. I know Marion and Janeri's here. A couple of others of you who are here who have been to my previous home. We once had a rocket land from Gaza across the valley to my home on a Saturday afternoon in 2014, I think. I don't even remember what year it was, 14, 16. One of those periods that we were having tension with our neighbors. And I once met the guy who developed the Iron Dome, and I described the scene, and I said we're about 300 yards away from where the rocket landed. And I said, I know the system's designed to knock out the ones that are going into open areas as compared to populated area, but gee, that was awful close to my house. Was that a mistake, or was that actually by design, that 300 yards or 300 meters is within the accepted range of not wasting the $50,000 counter charge on each of those? And he didn't answer me. He wasn't going to give me any secrets. But we've had that a lot here. The point I wanted to make, though, was as much as the Iron Dome protects us as Israelis, it protects the Arabs of Gaza. Why is that? Because today we've seen direct hits on buildings. We've seen a direct hit on a school. We've seen direct hits on a bus. Thank God the bus tonight had no people in it, but the bus went on flames. And we have already 3 casualties that I know of, 3 people who have died and a few dozen who have been injured. I will tell you this: if that school had been populated, if the kids hadn't been, I neglected to mention that 500,000 Israeli school children stayed home from school today. And my son excitingly came into the room before and told me that he hears all the schools are going to be closing. So he thinks that's great. It's really not. But the reason is it's to prevent a mass casualty attack, because some of these rockets will get through. As we've seen today, some of them do get through. And God forbid it should be a mass casualty. God forbid they should hit a school or an apartment building or an old age home or any other such facility that's going to have a mass casualty. Israel will be left with no choice but to have an even more massive response that, unfortunately, because of how Gaza is as densely populated as it is, and because Hamas unabashedly fires their rockets from the midst of civilian populations, using their women and children for cover, we would end up having to go back, and there would be tremendous a tremendous backlash that would leave many, many more civilian casualties. And I can say from our side, I don't think anybody in Israel wants that. We have a lot of people who talk about making Gaza into a parking lot. I'm sure that there are a lot of people who would like that. I don't think that most people who speak like that ever would speak about that in terms of just sort of a mass civilian massacre. But the problem is the terrorists are rooted in and amongst the civilian population. It's apparently known that the leadership of Hamas has one of its bases underneath a hospital, because they assume that Israel will never take out the hospital. And I kind of hope that that is the case. But on the other hand, part of me wishes that we would just go and do business, whatever's needed. Tonight, the airport was closed because of rockets. As of the beginning of this program, over 130 rockets were shot at central Israel, including Tel Aviv, sirens going off all over the place. At least 3 dead, dozens more injured, including a 5-year-old girl. My son also came in and told me that tonight the army's going into Gaza. Now I don't know how my 15-year-old son thinks he knows that, but that's what he and his friends talk about, and it may be true. As I said, I have a son who's a paratrooper. All we know is he's in the area. He's already told us he's not going to be accessible. Since last night, he went back. And our son-in-law, who is in an operational position. I don't want to underscore, which I'll ask you at the end of this briefing. Pray for us, pray for our family, pray for my son and my son-in-law for sure. But they're just representatives of all of us, all of the army, all of the soldiers, and all of the civilians, people who are living under rocket fire tonight. It's and yesterday and all day today. It's devastating. And I just want to say, I'm not here to talk about the situation on the ground in Gaza, but I can't not be human and care for the fact that there are kids who are not going to sleep there tonight, and perhaps even decent parents who are worried about their kids and their well-being, as Israel will continue to respond tactically, but it's hard to be tactical in a situation where you're living and operating amidst civilians. The last thing that I think I wanted to say for now, and then we'll come back, and I want to take your questions, and it's a good time if you have questions to start popping them up, or for those of you who are in Zoom, certainly we'll be glad to have you to chat with you live. Things I want you to look for. Well, I'm not a prophet. I know enough about Middle East history and politics and diplomacy because I live here, and I also studied it academically, so I sort of live in my own petri dish. There are a few things to look for. One of them, which is being talked about here, but surely not in the international media. We still don't have a government. We're 2 years and 3 months into 4 elections. Here we go. So Frank, that's a good question. That's exactly the question about the current uncertainty of the election results. So we had our most recent election in March. We still don't have a government as a result of that. Prime Minister Netanyahu was given the opportunity to form the government first and had to hand that back. He was unsuccessful after 28 days of attempting to do so. And it's all a blur, but within the last week, the opportunity was handed over to the head of the Yesh Atid party. Yesh Atid in Hebrew means there is a future. The head of the party's name is Yair Lapid, and there are feverish negotiations with him and Naftali Bennett, who's the head of Yamina party, which is a very right of center party, and other parties across the gamut, from one of the most left-wing parties to some of the most right-wing parties in Israel, to form what they call as a government of a change, which is very similar to, for the Americans, it's very similar to some of the language that was used in the recent electoral campaign in the US. What's interesting about it is both sides, both the Netanyahu bloc and the everyone but Netanyahu bloc, if you will, have indicated they would be okay taking support from one of the Arab parties that got 4 seats. It's called Ram. It happens to be an Islamic party. I really don't know a whole lot about, I know what an Islamist party means, and that makes me a little uneasy, but I also know that he's an Israeli and the head of the Ram party, his name is Mansour Abbas, not to be confused and probably not related to the head of the Palestinian Authority, who's Mahmoud Abbas. Mansour Abbas wants to advocate for the well-being of the 20% of the country here that are Arabs. And that means economic, and that means in construction, and that means in education, and policing their communities even better, things that most Israelis are actually quite good with. There are some things that, of course, he advocates for that we're probably not all in agreement with. But Mansour Abbas is an Islamist. And now with the violence in Gaza and the rockets and what's going on in the streets here in Israel, with even Arab Israelis protesting and lighting fires and attempted lynches, he's kind of backed away from the negotiations to support any government. And that may mean, according to, as Frank just asked, we might not have a government. We might not be able to pull off a government because we don't have 61 seats in the Knesset, meaning 51%, who are representing the supporting any one government. So we may very well be on the way to a fifth election, or there could be a situation where people in Likud get wise and say, listen, we need all the more so, we need a right-wing government to handle all this. Maybe it's time that we help Benjamin Netanyahu retire, and we pool our resources and build a right-wing government and don't have the extreme leftists in the government. I don't know, but that's something to look for. How much Arab Israelis will continue to have as their default to blame Israel is also something to look for. Now, when I was making my notes that I'm glancing at earlier in the evening, I was going to tell you what you need to look out for is how far Hamas decides to shoot rockets further if they start targeting Tel Aviv. As of 2 hours ago, they were not yet, but they are now, and they have, and at least 130 rockets went in the direction of Tel Aviv. That's saying that they understand the consequences and they're prepared for the consequences. And that's why people like my son and my son-in-law are in the positions that they are, and my 15-year-old can run in and say, we're going in tonight. The question is, how much do they want to escalate, or can they back down? And the answer to that is unknown. And the other one remaining piece is how much Iranian influence is coming in, because Iran does support Hamas, and Iran also has its tentacles, of course, in Syria and in Lebanon with Hezbollah, and it's not impossible that they could open another front. So these are all things, and there's probably more, and perhaps you have questions to that effect. I'm going to answer the question at the end about what else to do in terms of praying. I have a few points at the end I'd like to talk about. I'm looking now at your questions. I do listen. I appreciate all the prayers. I appreciate it. Don't stop praying for us, not just for me and my family, but for all of us. It's a very, very tense time here. Yeah, so the question is, who decides when to use the rockets or when to escalate actions to protect Israel? So that's a very good question. The government will decide in accordance with military advisors, the chief of staff, and the other leaders of the IDF, all of the leaders of the IDF. As of last night at about this time, it's now 11:15 here, but as of about last night this time, the cabinet, it actually went to a cabinet vote, which I happen to think is absurd. You can't have a government voting on every military action. It's an absurd level of micromanagement. You need to empower the army to do what they need to do, and you need to have a couple of leaders who are prepared to put that note on their desk that says the buck stops here. I'm taking responsibility for this. But as of last night, the army, the government approved a massive military action by air only. What's transpired since then? I'm not getting any messages. I've not heard of artillery being moved in yet. Frank, when you joined us, and if you have any comments to this, and if anyone is current or ex-military, Ken, you've got a little bit of military connections there. My intuitiveness tells me that once we start moving in artillery and start heavy bombardment from the ground and the air, that's probably cover for sending in ground troops. But I don't know. I've never had the privilege of serving in the Army here or anywhere else for that matter, so I don't know the answer to that. I can tell you the answer a week after it happens to that question. I'm going to try and scroll through questions here on Facebook. I'm grateful for the prayers. I'm not going to acknowledge everyone's prayers because there's a lot of them, but keep praying. But how about questions? Is there anyone here? I'm not seeing everyone's face on Zoom, but if you have questions, feel free to unmute, and we'll try and do this in as orderly a way as we can. Anyone? Don, you seem like you're trying to unmute yourself, or no? Frank, any comments about what to anticipate militarily here?
Jonathan?
Yes.
What are you hearing from the government? What are they saying I know that I've had a couple of my friends in Israel tell me that their sons who are officers that recently left the army have been called, have been called back. But what are you hearing from government? What are you hearing from the Ministry of Defense about what their, what's their plan in this?
Well, they're not sharing their plans. They are sharing brash words, and that's okay. The plans, I think, we'll find out after the fact. I will tell you that everyone, it seems that except for the Islamist parties and maybe the ultra left wing parties, that everyone's really on board with this. And again, I don't know why we have to keep doing this. There's a fear, and this is not an answer to your question, Cheryl, but it just, again, a little bit of the pathology here. There's a fear that we're going to have this protracted battle, war, maybe ground troops, maybe not ground troops, more lives lost, and then there's going to be a ceasefire, and it's going to get quiet for a while, and then Hamas will get stronger again, and we're going to keep living like this. As compared to it feels to me, Cheryl, like there's a bigger demand now. Come on, let's just get it done. But all of us,
Yeah.
but none of us want to see a slaughter in Gaza. I don't think so. I don't want to see that. I want to see, on a personal chat on my Facebook earlier, someone commented about something, I don't know, and I said I've never been anti-Arab. I'm anti-terrorist. If you're a terrorist, if you're trying to kill us, then you're our enemy, and you need to be dealt with accordingly. But it's hard. It's very hard. You may have missed when I said my son-in-law was apparently, they did announce on the news today that the Army called up 5,000 reservists.
Yes.
It's not a large number. So my son-in-law is one of those. He's in some specialty that I won't talk about, but they need him now, and we don't know when he's going to come home. Oh, there's somebody who's just coming in. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen. My son seemed very matter of fact about it, going there. I know a lot about their training. They're awfully well trained. And gosh, I'm proud of him. And between the prayers, and that's coming from all of our Christian friends, who most of you are, and Jews all over the world, and from literally all over the world. Between that and having the strength that God gives us in our army, it doesn't mean I'm not afraid. Of course I am. I got my son potentially going into the Gaza Strip tomorrow or tonight. I don't know.
Jonathan,
Yeah.
it's Ken. I just saw Liz Cheney retweeted a IDF tweet, and she says America stands with Israel. She's not very popular these days in the Republican Party here, but we are sitting here having a lot of issues. The Russians again did a ransomware attack on us, which is not uncommon. They continue to do this. It's a ransomware attack, though. It's not call it a cyber attack, but they want money. It wasn't to disrupt us necessarily.
Right.
But the Congress here is slow to act, dealing with anything, especially in this environment, in this country. And Israel's not even a front page issue, or it doesn't seem to be a priority with this administration at all, other than to continue to pander to the anti-Semitic groups, and there's no real leadership or strength. So I think that may, to use your word, embolden Hamas or others, knowing that the U.S. is weak when it comes to Israel now, and that they're going to push the limits with this. I've got my own feelings about this administration. I think many people probably share them, but that's a problem. And I don't know if our ambassador, Israel's ambassador here, is strong enough, or our U.S. ambassador there is strong enough to take up the real flag. Because anything that happens is going to be a negative PR for Israel.
Yes.
I mean, for some reason, this BDS movement and the Gaza, that this has been turned into a apartheid conversation, and we have Congress people who are just absurd. How they get into office, I'll never know, but that doesn't favor well for Israel. So there's got to be a concentrated effort on the part of Israel to, I think, take strong action on its own and let the chips fall where they may, because if we let it go too long, it's all going to turn against, that sounds harsh. I know where your heart is. Sounds harsh, but the compromises keep going to the left in this country.
Well,
So, just my comment.
Right or left, we're kicking the can down the road. We're not addressing it, and I don't like to refer to these as wars, because they're battles. We're still fighting the war of independence here. These are just battles. I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey. Okay, there was a battle of Princeton. It wasn't a war of Princeton. And there were battles of Trenton. There were battles of other places that were part of bigger wars. We're still fighting that broader war, and we haven't yet won. I mean, we're here, and we will win, but we haven't done that. And I echo a lot of what you're saying as I'm sitting here watching what's happening in our country on live TV. I feel like we need to go in and just be done with it. But
well, biblically, we might speed it up if all the nations of the world come against Israel. And those of you Christians know what I'm talking about. Might speed it up that way and get to the last page of the New Testament. But I'll leave it at that. I'm going to back off and listen.
Well, I appreciate it, Ken. I appreciate it.
My question to you, Jonathan, I'm sorry, does this feel different to you? Is this a different set of circumstances than what has occurred in the past? So that, because you keep saying, we just want to get it done. What does that mean? And then what is the holdback? Is it because you don't have an official government? As Ken was alluding to here in the US, right? Now we have a weakened government, or a perceived weakened government. So is that the reason that this maybe it just feels different? It feels like this is an escalation that can't be protracted. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, this may be, it's a great word you use. Right now it's an escalation. To what extent is it going to become, honestly, all of these battles and names of operations blur to me. I don't know the difference between them all, and it doesn't matter. And I forget what years, which things happened, because they happen here. This may become a week and a half long blip, or it may become one of our longest, quote unquote, wars, like we had in the summer of 2006. Now, I certainly, and Ken's point was a great point, when there's a perceived weakness, whether it's here in Israel or overseas among Israel's allies, for sure, the terrorists are going to take advantage of that. But they're terrorists. They don't care. Like, and Ken, I don't know if you meant the point or understood it, in fact, the depth of what you said, but yeah, of course, when we do anything to hit back, we're going to get blamed. We're going to get blamed no matter what happens. So maybe put all the chips on black and say, let's go for it, right? That maybe that's the answer if we're going to get blamed for it anyway. But
that's kind of that's what I was saying, Jonathan. But I'm sitting here in a nice, comfy office in Charlotte, North Carolina, so it's a little different for me. I wish I was there, but I'm not. But yeah, I think it's gonna take a real decisive action to solve this, if that means solving it. I don't even know what solving means.
That's the thing. Right. Will it be a solution if this stops and we have a ceasefire and summer begins and people celebrate that we're no longer in a COVID lockdown and we can have a normal summer preceding maybe the first full school year in 2 years. I don't know. Or does a solution mean obliterating Hamas in the Gaza Strip? A year, I don't remember which battle it was. If it were up to me, I'd be at the Ministry of Defense right now saying, okay, Fatah, the PLO, doesn't like Hamas. They were kicked out of Gaza very unceremoniously in a bloody coup, literally a bloody coup. I don't use that term lightly. In 2005, 6, excuse me, and maybe the answer is truck up thousands of Palestinian Arabs armed over to Gaza and throw them over the border and let them work it out. Fight it out. You take your place back, right? It's not our battle, but it affects us. It affects us deeply. It's not a sustainable, it's not a normal sustainable situation. But going to the question just before, what's different? Maybe nothing. Maybe because it's been relatively quiet. In fact, my son said to me, maybe he was only here with amongst us 2.5 hours yesterday, and much of that I wasn't even talking to him. But he said, yeah, it's summertime. Summertime we have wars, and I think there's going to be a war. Oh, did he hear anything in the army? I don't know. He was annoyed having to go back and not go straight to the front last night, because he said if they weren't going to send me right to the front, I could have celebrated and stayed at the wedding. Happened to have been really good food too. But he's ready. He's ready, and I'm grateful for that. I'm proud of him. I'm proud of all the soldiers. I've learned so much about our military through him. But I don't know what's the answer. Frank, you have a...
Yeah, I have a couple of comments and then a quick question. I guess the first comment I would make is, well, for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Pastor Frank Lanahan. I live in Luster, Montana. I've been to Israel 10 times, and I work with the ministry Bridges for Peace, and I got to meet Jonathan in person my last trip to Israel. I served in the United States Marine Corps. I served during Desert Storm, Desert Shield back in 1990, 91 against Saddam Hussein. And I have a particular interest in Israel and, of course, their military and strategy. And I will say that with all the news feeds that I get daily that come into my news stream, whether it's Facebook or email or in print, I've been watching the convergence of what looks to be a perfect storm in Israel concerning conflict with Hezbollah and Hamas. And the convergence is the lack of elections by the PLO. The convergence is President Trump's strong stand to move the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, to recognize the Golan Heights, to recognize in speeches Israel's right to Jerusalem as the undivided capital. And then for the PLO and the Palestinians in the West Bank to really sense that they no longer have the hopes of the Oslo Accords back in 1994. And this whole idea of moving back to pre-67 lines was really shattered with the Abraham Accords. And so you have that. And then you also have another convergence of Israel's political leadership being in limbo and the American leadership jumping off the cliff, showing strength with Israel. We jumped off the cliff in this last election. President Biden does not seem to know where his footing is on Israel. And it seems that the State Department is giving mixed messages to the Middle East as they talk about wanting to return to negotiations with Iran. So a lot of this stuff is coming together. And Jonathan, you're absolutely right. You can go back and read the military annals, and it says that in fact, the Bible, kings go to war in the springtime. And we're looking at this for the next number of months because of the weather. That's a big part of it. Let me make another comment about Gaza. Gaza is heavily populated, and Hamas lives among the populace, and you can't tell one from the other. To call up 5,000 reservists, most of them will be logistical. Very few of them will be infantry. They won't be artillery. They won't be tanks. There might be a little bit of that, but 5,000, that's nothing. When you see calling up of anything over 25 to 50,000, then you're starting to sense that the citizenship is starting to converge and say, we need to do something about this. Now, it's already been stated, I'm speaking to the choir here, but what is the objective? The objective is to remove Hamas. You can't. They were elected by the Palestinians themselves back in either 2005, 2006. So here's my final question. I mean, that was all comment. Here's my question to you, Jonathan. You may know this better than I do. Back in 2019, President Trump wisely, bravely, courageously took out Iran's military general, Qasem Soleimani, and it caused Iran to go quiet, and they still haven't responded yet. Is there someone that Israel can target in Hamas leadership that might put a pause on a lot of this activity? And I'll be quiet with that question.
It's a great question. The answer is there are people that we can target. That's not the issue. The question is getting them. If they're hiding in a bunker under the hospital in Gaza City, then that's honestly, I wouldn't want to be making that decision, right? That's a horrible decision. Are they there? Yes. Will Hamas, if that were to happen, will they go quiet or will they ramp it up? And that's the only thing that I would perhaps disagree with your premise, is that I don't believe Hamas will go quiet. In response to some comment or question earlier, Hamas wins when they hurt and kill us, and Hamas wins when we hurt and kill them, and they even win when we hurt and kill the Palestinian Arab civilians. So it's kind of a lose-lose scenario, and I'm not. Funny story how I tried to get into the army here. That's not for right now. I don't have that experience. I don't know. I don't know the answer. And I don't know how many of these Hamas leaders that there are that we would need to really take them out to do some serious damage. Soleimani was like the king of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. I think he was the top guy. So naturally, taking him out, and that operation, by the way, it was also recently announced or revealed that Israel provided the U.S. with the intelligence of Soleimani's phone numbers, his cell phone numbers, so that the U.S. could figure out where he was when he landed in Iraq and take him out the way he was. So I wish I had an answer. It's a great question. I'll add that to my list of things to follow. They're there, and I will say this, maybe as a last comment in case anyone else has questions.
Jonathan, I have one more question for you, and this is actually for the group too. Do you think that this is a coordinated effort between Hamas and what's going on in Israel and the United States, and the fact that all of a sudden our whole gas enterprise has been shut down? I'm in Virginia. Our governor just declared a state of emergency, and we have gas lines now that are going for miles and miles and miles. And I wasn't sure if maybe, and of course, this is for colleagues who are much wiser than I am, is this a coordinated effort that we're just not paying enough attention to from all sides and all angles?
I have a lot with Hamas. I have a very hard time believing it, and I think I don't remember honestly who said it just now, whether it was Ken or whether it was somebody else. But I think it was Ken. I think that the administration has really been very hands-off and disregarding of the Middle East. I mean, with the exception perhaps of trying to woo Iran to come and sign a deal again, or keep the terms of the deal that it signed in 2015. To me, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of action here. So to have a level of coordination with as low as a terrorist organization, I don't know. But by the way, it does come back to there was something that I read. I made a note of it, and I maybe I'll look for it and post it on the Facebook if I can remember, or if someone reminds me to do that. There was a fabulous point that was made by some analysts here that the U.S. must be coordinating at least with Jordan, because think about the implications of Hamas, of terrorists asserting authority de facto on the Temple Mount and pushing and emasculating the Hashemite kingdom like that. As it was, they almost had a coup in Jordan a month or so ago, and that was a friendly one among allegedly with the king's half brother. Will Hamas terrorists be glad to come in and begin to claim what was the majority of Palestine, that's called Jordan now, and create a terrorist state there? Of course they will. And they don't want to see King Abdullah succeed. They want to see him out, as do the Iranians, and as do who knows how many other people. So there are a lot of interests, and I would hope that someone in Washington is aware of that. Jordan needs to be propped up. Jordan should be a little bit wiser, but Jordan needs to be propped up. I know we could go on with this forever. I want to begin to wrap up. If there are any other questions, maybe shoot them as a text at this point. I wish you could feel my chest right now, because my heart's racing, and I'm very emotional. Just knowing that this, yes, of course, my son and my son-in-law, and what this means to all of us here in Israel. But the fact that this briefing was because of you, some of you, and people like you from all over the world who have just expressed their concern and their love and their support and their prayers. I want to thank you all for that, and I want to ask you certainly please share this so others know that that's important. There were three things. Someone asked an earlier question, what can we do? So I came up with three. Three is a good number. Pray, okay? Absolutely pray. We need that. People have posted prayers certainly in the Facebook. Please continue to do that. Please pray. Advocate. Okay, you all live in various countries, in various states or cities or jurisdictions, where whether you elect your officials or not, let them know that you care about Israel and why you care about Israel, and don't let them get away with I lost the phrase, the moral equivalence. There's no moral equivalence. We don't want to kill anybody who's not a combatant. We don't want to be in a situation of having our people killed. Golda Meir said it really well, that we'll have peace when the Arabs love their children more than they hate us. Right? That's fact. Here goes rocket attacks now beginning again. That's a fact, and I truly believe there are so many Israelis who are still willing to bend over backwards to make peace. If they would just stop fighting with us, they'd have peace, and they'd even have some form of independent entity, state, something. And I'm not getting into that conversation now. But advocate. There's no room for moral equivalence. People who fire thousands of rockets at populated areas are in a completely different league than anything that Israel ever could dream of, much less what Israel ever has done or would do. And the other thing I want to ask, it's not going to help me personally. I run the Genesis 123 Foundation. We build bridges between Jews and Christians with Israel. You all fit into that because you're either Jewish or Christian, and or you care about Israel and what's going on. We give the money that we raise to organizations and projects that are doing meaningful things. So if you'd like to make a donation or share this with other people, share this with other people to do so. The money that we raise this week, hopefully it won't continue, but anything that comes in this week is going for supporting our soldiers. We're not providing military, but whether they're waiting on the front line or whether they go in, we're gonna if there's a need to bring them cold drinks and fresh watermelon and ice cream and pay for an ice cream truck, if we have the resources, we're going to do that. There's a whole lot of trauma here now, and there are casualties, victims of terror, and families of terror victims. We're going to find a way to support that. These are and to the extent that there's the ability, emergency medical care. These are three of the pillars that we fund anyway. So I just want you to know, those of you who know me, this is with 1,000% integrity. It's with a privilege to be able to do that, and I encourage you to participate. You do that at our website, genesis123.co, as long as it's not for the flags that Ken is getting and other people are getting. And we're not going to mix the money, but all the money that we get this week And if we have to next week, we'll go for those things. And if I am in the position to do that, I'll drive down to the Gaza border and you'll see me live on Facebook, actually delivering on your behalf, being your representative. There's one more question here, Richard. What are the practical implications regarding Netanyahu and the current government in the face of a longer engagement with Hamas? Do they stay in power or indefinitely? So there are a lot of good questions. The answer is probably not. There is a legislative process. The current people who have the right to form a government will have another about 3 weeks to do so. Then President Rivlin has the opportunity to kick it over to the Knesset for 3 weeks, or just say there's a stalemate, we're calling fifth elections. The irony is the one election that we know is going to happen, I just read the date, but I forgot it's coming up in July, is actually for our new president. The president, we have a one-term president who serves 1 7-year term. President Rivlin, who I think has been amazing in many ways, is finishing his term. And so at some point in the next month to month and a half, there'll be a vote in the Knesset of 120 members of Knesset to vote who will be the new president, and that is a secret vote, and that's for and I'm going to make one more announcement to invite you all. We have 3. This is not a planned program, but we do have three webinars that are planned. You can email me, text me, or find out from our social media about them. Saturday, also at 10 p.m. Israel time, we'll be hosting another webinar on the status of Ethiopian Jews and how we as Genesis 123 are helping them. We have a fabulous guest who's going to be sharing her story. And if you don't know why we're celebrating the 30th anniversary of Operation Solomon this month and what that means, please join us. On the 19th of this month, we will be having another webinar with a security and political expert, Elliot Chodoff. The name of we set the date and the name of the program before this week's events happened. It's called An Unfriendly Day in the Neighborhood, and we're going to be broadcasting from the north part of Israel and speaking about all of the implications of what's going on in our neighborhood. I don't know where this situation will be in 2 weeks or a week on the 19th, so stay tuned on that, and please join us. And also the 3rd, we will be having a conversation. I don't remember if it's the 26th or 27th of May, with Rabbi Yehuda Glick, who is one of the candidates for president. Some of you know him or know of him because he's also a great champion of building bridges between Jews and Christians. So stay tuned for those, sign up for those, and plan on joining. With that, I know that there's some more questions, but time is short. I want to introduce and bring on my friend TJ, Thomas Lee Johnson, who's going to close us out in prayer. And thank you again. While TJ is coming on, everybody, thank you again. It's been really a privilege to have this opportunity to share, and I'm so grateful for the love and support and the prayers that are coming from all over. TJ, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Eloheka, Beku Lavaka, Uveku Nafsheka, Uveku Mahudeka. Jesus, Messiah Yeshua, we love you. We honor you. We thank you that Isaiah 12 says, surely God is my salvation. I will trust and not be afraid. The Lord himself is my strength and my defense. He has become my salvation. With joy, you will draw water from the wells of salvation. Messiah, we pray an impossible prayer. We pray that in the middle of rockets exploding, you will protect the lives of your children. We pray that in the middle of death, destruction, explosions, and ash, your name will be made great in your land. Israel is your chosen, and you are a promise keeper. Keep your promise, Messiah. Keep your promise with your children. And we pray for Jonathan Feldstein. We pray for his son-in-law, all their peers, all their units that are going to and fro, doing what they need to do to advance your agenda. Protect them, keep them. Cause the rockets to stall. Cause the rockets to explode before they even leave the ground. And cease this foolishness. We pray in the name of Messiah Yeshua.
Thank you, TJ. Thank you, everybody, for participating today. Where there are updates, you can follow us on social media, and I'm grateful for the love and friendship and prayers. God bless you all.
Jonathan,
Yes.
just please give us the first name of your son and the first name of your son-in-law so we can pray for them by name.
Sure. My son is Natan, Natan, and my son-in-law is Yechiel.
Thank you for that.
Thanks for asking, Cheryl. God bless you all. Thank you for giving me this privilege of sharing tonight.
Amen.
We love you.